Okay, and then Jamie, I did just throw the YouTube link in, and then as soon as you make your first comment, I'll list you as a moderator.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Fila.
Hey, Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for helping us out with this. I really appreciate you being here. And for the people that are just showing up, you're in for a real treat. This man is an expert and a man I've looked up to for quite some time in this area. And so I'm real thrilled that you're here. And I wanted to publicly, while the stream was going and it's being recorded, get on record my appreciation of your willingness to participate in this. So thanks a lot, John.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your support. My skill is not in planning these kinds of events, but I'm happy to show up and do what I can.
Yeah, that's been the spirit of this whole thing, is everybody just applies what they have some skill and experience in on behalf of teachers and students, which started out across this state, but then ended up going a little bit bigger than the state. So pretty fun stuff to be able to make some impact out of an otherwise really peculiar situation.
Yeah.
Last night we hit Czech Republic, so we can add that. We can shade that piece in.
All right, let's get that in the map. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And also I should give a shout out to Jamie Hawkinson, something that I keep meaning to get to, but because everything's so busy, is a special page for moderators, because our moderators in this work have just been phenomenal. Jamie set a high bar on Friday with the introductions and setting the tone for it. And so a special thanks also to Jamie Hawkinson. For those of you who are joining, she is currently teaching. She is a classroom teacher managing this with fourth graders in Edina Public Schools and with her own children at home. So she is in the middle of this, as are many of you. So a special thanks for Jamie taking an hour out of her already very busy day and life to help moderate this session.
My pleasure. This is great.
I hate my backlight thing. I'm gonna have to move later. But then you can look, oh, look how nice it is outside.
Sean, Dave mentioned sending some ring lights out to participants.
Yeah, I think that that'll be our major capital investment once we get our first round of funders.
Yeah, I thought we were going stickers. I thought that was our first round of capital investment, was stickers. No?
I think stickers are good. Stickers are good. Everybody can put them on their computers that we won't ever see again at conferences, because we're all digital. So we'll see. Okay, John, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host. You'll see the breakout bar across the bottom. And then if you guys have any questions, you can just let me know.
All right, well, hopefully everyone can see my screen already.
Yep, that is set.
And I will go ahead and mute myself in case my children start to on me if we need and questions come in. So have fun today.
Well, it's 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I appreciate your time and interest in this topic. This is one that's been really important to me for a long time. And I am a curriculum coordinator with District 287. We're an intermediate that serves member school districts. And then we have some statewide projects like the Minnesota Partnership for Collaborative Curriculum. We're involved in some other open educational resource initiatives. And we also run and operate the Northern Star Online program, which is the largest supplemental online program in the state. I also teach English for that program on the side. So the things I talk about today, I have some experience in dealing with. And Jamie, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Hawkinson. I'm moderator with John today, so I'll be feeding any questions or important comments over to the meeting, as well as from the YouTube channel. I'm currently teaching 4th grade in Edina Public Schools, and doing a lot of this distance learning on the side. This has just been fabulous for everyone to come together and to collaborate. It's just been really neat to see so many people from around the world come together. So glad to be a part of this.
Thanks, Jamie. And she'll be monitoring the chat for any questions that slip by me. So feel free to enter those. And for those of you on YouTube Live, you can enter your questions there as well. If you're watching the recording of this, my contact information will show up at the end. Please feel free to reach out and follow up on any of these topics and slides. So thank you again. I wanted to start by talking about a real example of a district that had just adopted a new learning management system. They had switched over to one-to-one devices for all of their students. They went with iPads, and they went full Google Apps and adopted digital curriculum all within 1 year. So that was really overwhelming for teachers. I showed up at one point to work with a group of teachers on working with their curriculum, and there were tears in the room. People were crying, and it was just one more thing, and I was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And we had to do a lot of processing to get through all that. It kind of reminds me of now. So a few years went by, and in the same district, they had kind of developed their workflow that was working okay for most of their students. The students would go into Schoology. They would download their content in a PDF form. They would mark it up in Notability and resubmit it back to their teacher. So it sounds pretty simple. But imagine if you're a 7th grade student and you're blind, and how that workflow might work out for you. So aside from the challenging issues that arise from navigating courses and content like that, there are a whole other range of complications that come up when we're working with accessibility. And one of the biggest ones is awareness. If you don't know what a challenge accessible content can be for learners who struggle, you might not really think it's that big of a deal. You might think it'll be rare, unlikely that I'll ever have a blind or a deaf student in my class. And those are typically the first examples that come up when we're talking about accessibility. But I want to go beyond that a little bit. So just to start off, I don't want people to panic because nothing that we do will be perfectly accessible. We try to hit as much as we can and be as supportive and as inclusive as we can. What I want to stress today is that we should be designing everything we do with accessibility in mind from the start. And there are a whole lot of benefits for that, aside from just the topic that I brought up earlier with the 7th grade student. So really, when you design for accessibility, we're creating a foundation that will help us deal with complicated issues that will make all kinds of work with students easier down the road, and we'll get to some of those examples too. It will absolutely save you time, even if some of that extra time you have to spend up front making it available in the proper formats might seem like a challenge. I would consider that time banking. So that time that you put in up front will certainly save you time later on, and then makes the work you're doing more usable in the future. And so, like I said, awareness is the first step to a positive outcome. There's still a real lack of awareness surrounding this topic. And I think part of the challenging thing in a traditional conference where you might have several different topics to choose from when you're looking for which sessions you should go to. This one doesn't always get the attention it deserves. So if people want to go learn about whatever is new with Google Apps, but then there's an accessibility session at the same time, people often skip the accessibility section and think that that's something they can always get to later. But it's really these kinds of sessions that should maybe come first and foremost, and then we can learn about some of those other tools and applying these kinds of features later on. So as we get started, I want to stress the POUR principles, because the idea of the POUR principles in terms of design is that accessibility actually improves the learning outcomes for all learners, not just those who might struggle with some particular feature or just those who use some kind of assistive technology. And so the idea is that we want to provide students with disabilities the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services as students without disabilities with substantially equivalent ease of use. So the POUR in POUR principles stands for perceivable. We want students to be able to see and hear what is there. We want to make it operable so that the users and learners can interact with the content. Understandable, making sure our language is clear and easy to follow. And robust, that it works well with all devices. Those can be a challenge when you're making the transition from face-to-face classroom instruction to something like what we're doing now. I won't necessarily call it online learning because a lot of what's happening I don't feel like falls into that category. But in distance learning, there's a lot to learn with making things understandable and robust, because when we're working with a group of students in a classroom, we can pick up on a lot of nonverbals. We can see what people are doing and how they're interacting with the materials. But when we switch over to what we're doing now with distance learning, that becomes a challenge. And it's a particular challenge because students that fit into a wide range of categories who might need extra supports, and we'll get into just a few of those. And this isn't an exhaustive list where we have students with learning disabilities, visual and hearing impairments, mobility issues. There's a wide range of learners that we can help support through the design and delivery of our curriculum. And so the idea I wanted to stress is that students would rather go without than stand out. Students are not going to ask for additional help and support because it might make them stand out. And if they see content that isn't inclusive for someone with their needs, they are right away given the message that this is not for them, that they need some special version of that. So oftentimes students will just not ask for help. And we've noticed that in online learning for a few years now, that if students encounter a link in their course or a video that's broken, they very often won't report it. And we will notice sometimes that some of those have been broken for a while, and students just found their own workarounds to get the necessary information. So we want to be continually reviewing our resources to make sure that that the text and the directions are clear, and that the students are able to access and interact with them. So the advantages for educators for making your content more accessible will certainly, for one, improve student learning and outcomes. It also reduces the work associated with arranging those individual accommodations, so that when, at Northern Star Online, for instance, when I'm teaching my English class, when I'm notified that one of my students has an IEP or 504 plan, I don't stress about it at all, because I know that the chances are very high that my course already addresses most of those issues through the way that we've designed our materials. So when I go and review that, it's comforting to know that what was already there by default is supporting those learners who may have struggled in another setting. For students, certainly it's going to help them spend less time on trying to figure out just what it is they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to get to it. And being more inclusive also makes students feel a little more engaged, and they're able to interact more with that social presence component of the class, where it's the ability to kind of see themselves and be able to share part of themselves and their culture back with the course. And that's a really important part of all of this, because that social component of learning is just as important as the content you use, and it's just as important as how you guide your students through a course. And so I don't mean to make everybody read through all the lists and resources that I provide on the slides, but I just want to make them available for those who may come back later and watch the recording, or may need some further justification about why we're doing all of this. But you'll see the same themes come up throughout, one of which just being, it's the law. We're supposed to do this all the time for everything, and as we know better, we should be doing better. And what we want to do is try to remove the barriers that are here before they've actually affected anybody. And this isn't about making the content easier or making the assessments easier or the assignments that students do, but it really is about that access and experience, and making it available to everybody. I do want to just cover a couple common ones that we want to fix up right away, dealing with visual impairments, because there are a lot more people with visual impairments than you might realize. Often I sit in staff meetings, and when I'm talking about this issue, or we're looking at somebody's slide deck, we'll find out that someone in that group is colorblind, which presents a set of challenges when everything you're looking at is digital. And we'll hit an example of that in a little bit. But what I would challenge people to do is, if you can find a screen reader, and if you can't, let me know, I'll help hook you up with one. But go to your class resources, turn on the screen reader, and see if you can navigate to the materials that you have set up for your students. And it isn't just that the screen reader would help you figure out where that stuff is, but one of the benefits of listening to what a screen reader does, it also helps support those students who are using tab navigation. They can't physically manipulate a mouse. They need another type of switch, for instance, or they just hit tab to get to the content. And as you're using screen readers, you'll also hear where those selections are being made, and it kind of helps support your use that way. So it's important to have a little bit of that same experience, so you know that the frustrations that come in play when something doesn't work, and maybe you faced that already, maybe 2 months ago when you were starting to plan for what we're doing right now. Those same kinds of frustrations are now happening to students in every one of their courses, and potentially their parents. So creating accessible content really is all of our responsibility. It shouldn't just be left up to a blind or visually impaired specialist who's tasked with supporting a specific student, but this really falls on all of us to make these better. We have relied on BVI specialists for a long time. They would take the content on paper, send it out to Braille lists, help make it into an accessible format, maybe in HTML for students to interact with. And that was relatively easy. And ironically, as we made the switch to digital curriculum, which should have been even easier to make accessible and available in different formats, that often fell by the wayside, because it was just fast and easy to throw stuff up, and people's lack of design sense made them put things like clip art and fancy borders and all kinds of things on their worksheets, which we were told to do in all of our grad school classes, and how engaging that was going to be for our learners if we fancied up our worksheets. That actually ended up breaking a lot of materials. And then, so once you put that digital content into a learning management system, there are even more complications. So we're going to walk through a lot of those issues. In one of my examples coming out of District 287, where we have an army of itinerants that goes out into our member districts and supports learners with all kinds of issues. We we had one who was changing about 40 inaccessible files per week to support her student. And what was happening was, as she was creating these files in an accessible format, those weren't then being taken by the classroom teachers in the district, and they weren't replacing what was already there, which would have been ideal if we could take these things that were fixed, put them back in the class. Okay, now we've been adding that layer of accessibility on top of existing curriculum. They were just used for this one student, and then ultimately they're sitting on a computer somewhere, and they weren't used to then improve the courses, so that the next time a student comes through, which is going to happen because the particular student had a younger sibling who will also be coming through the system with the same visual impairment issues, she's going to need all of those changes all over again. And it would have been much better for this BVI specialist time to help support this learner and advocate for herself and learn the skills needed to get through the learning materials and make the submissions necessary. So in this case, it's not just wasting time, it's going to be wasting even more time down the road. And so I want to talk about oh, go ahead, Jamie.
We have hand raised in here, and it's a question that I feel like maybe he should ask Clary. So Samuel, I'm going to mute you for you to ask your question.
Yeah.
Why are niggers black?
I'm sorry, was there a question?
Like maybe it was something about the BVI in the higher remote.
Oh, you know what? I went ahead and I removed Sam. So no worries about that. I apologize for anybody who saw that piece, and I'll be locking the room.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so one of the other reasons why this is a complicating issue, so let's say that you are in a school district and everybody's well versed in their learning management system, everybody's putting content in, and let's say all that digital content was accessible, which very likely it is not. At least I haven't seen that occur yet. And I've reviewed thousands of courses by this point in online settings. Every teacher has their own preferences and style. So unless you're meeting as a team or as a district talking about how your content is uploaded and made available to your learners, a student coming in first period is going to have a different navigational experience than the students in second period, in third period, in fourth period, because a lot of it has to do with the teacher preference and how they upload their materials. So that isn't just a frustrating issue for students, but in this period for parents who are trying to get to their learners' content. So if you have, I also speak as a frustrated parent. We have 4 kids in first, third, fifth, and 8th grade, and we're all, every single one of those kids has a different experience in terms of how they access their content. The accounts that are needed, the tools that are used, the way they navigate through content, the parent supports and features. So that in itself is a huge accessibility issue, not just for the student, but now it becomes an issue kind of across the board. So I do want people to take into consideration not just the learning materials you're going to use for that one period or that or for that week, but consider what this is like, this overall experience, this holistic approach for what's the cognitive load going to be on this learner from the time they wake up to the time they're finished with their work. How much can they really be expected to use up that cognitive load to get through all of their materials in a day? And it's a lot more stressful than the students who spend the entire day in a building kind of moving from course to course. So we really want to have the learners spending the time engaged with the materials, working on their submissions, working in their groups, meeting with their teachers, their other students in their class, or discussing what they're doing with their parents or grandparents or some other mentor or sibling, because that time is well spent. That's part of learning. The time it takes to figure out what to do and how to get there, that is draining and kind of complicates the issue. And I also want to talk about some situational issues related to accessibility. So you could have a perfectly accessible slide deck, but if you're using it in a setting like this and you're not giving it to people ahead of time to follow on their own, then the text is not selectable. They can't click on the links. So if you're looking right now and you see one of my references, you can't click on it because you're watching a screen share. Or if people are posting screenshots of text, that's not accessible. So depending on the situation, where you may think something was just fine, it may be broken depending on how you use it. So one of the reasons why I'm always putting my short links to my slideshow and making it available in different formats is so that those people who want to get to that content before or after or even during, and they just missed a slide or two, you can still access and reference that. Alt text is a really important feature for students who use screen readers. There are also people that might look for that kind of descriptive text in other situations, but alternative text is really only to be used when an image is conveying information. I've seen people go a little bit overboard with this. So if they have clip art or if something is just a decorative image on a page, there's really no reason to put descriptive text or alt text associated with that issue, because it may just end up confusing people. Screen readers or the blind don't necessarily need to know if there's some cute little clip art image that was just there to pretty up the page, and if they don't need to see it, really does anybody need to see it? I would carefully consider my use of the unnecessary with learning materials, especially in a time like this. But when we are conveying information through images, we definitely don't want to leave other users out. So there are guides for how to do this, especially supports for people who use drawings, math, tables, and charts. Those can really be complicated things to describe and convey through text sometimes. And I know it's great. People process images so much faster than they process text, but we want to make both things available to people. So provide some guides for that. Again, like, I love the way infographic looks. I love the clarity of how they display information a lot of times, but we do want to make sure that we can sufficiently describe them in a way that someone can come back and access with a screen reader and review later on. There are ways of getting the text from screenshots back out of those screenshots and into selectable text. If you just simply search for optical character recognition or free OCR, you'll find some resources to do that. I see that there is a question in the chat related to consistency and style guides. We do share our style guides for District 287, so we can make some of those available as well. If they're not already in the resources, I'll make sure that those get added. But we keep that part pretty simple. When you're going in to create your alt text, there's a graphic on the screen right now that's showing you putting the alt text into an image in a Google slideshow. Same process for Google Docs, where you basically just right-click on the image. Especially if it has some kind of text on it, you want to go in and then enter the alt text for that. Excuse me. If you're using a learning management system and uploading your image, there will often be a place for you to enter the descriptive text right there on the page. The screenshot I'm showing here is in a Moodle page where if you don't check off that the description is not necessary, it won't even let you upload the image. And there are some other systems that do that as well. If you check that the description is not necessary, that's when it'll put in something called a null tag, which allows screen readers to skip it. So I want to talk about what this looks like as more of us are learning about the capabilities of our learning management systems. I want to make sure that we're starting to use those appropriately as well. So I mentioned the example of trying to consider what that process would be like for you if you were using iPad, downloading in Schoology via PDF, marking up in Notability, and then uploading it back when you're blind. And then that student is taking, you know, up to 6 to 7 courses a day when each teacher has a different navigational structure. So one of the things that breaks the accessibility in a learning management system is the file structure and the format, how the students get to those files, how those files are named. So even the naming conventions become something that can be an accessibility feature. So what do you name the items in your class as students navigate through them, and what does maybe one of your coworkers name those same types of resources as students navigate through them? Do you have the same numbering and naming conventions? That would really help speed up the process for students accessing those materials. How the files are designed, you're making sure that if students do have to download files, that those all have a similar navigational structure. We do our best with Northern Star Online to eliminate file downloads whenever possible and just make the content display right there on the page. So if it's a video, it's embedded right in context. If it's text, then it's right there available for students. So we really try to make sure that there's as little extra work as possible going into this, because we want the time spent on content. I'm always hesitant to admit this, but I was a big part of the problem for a really long time. I entered my first kind of big teaching job in an ALC, and the big joke at the time was, where's the curriculum that I'm supposed to teach? And then everyone kind of laughs because we didn't get anything. And we had a really small budget. So we're just cranking out our own stuff as fast as possible, like trying to grab and lean on whatever tool we can find. I'm guessing that sounds familiar to everybody by now. But that's kind of what's been happening. So all these vendors jump out of the woodwork with free access to all of their tools and resources. And we have tech integrationists that for years have been suggesting things like Prezi, where it just makes it really cool and engaging and fun. But what they didn't know or think about at the time was that all of those things are breaking accessibility. And I've had my challenges and struggles with Prezi now for a while, and they're still now over 10 years later claiming that accessibility is on their radar. It's something that they're working on. But I do think when you are reaching out to these vendors and looking to use these tools, ask them for a demonstration of their accessibility features. Don't just ask them if their products are accessible, because if you ask them, is your stuff accessible? They'll say, yeah, of course, everything's accessible. They might even give you a link to their company's statement on accessibility, or they might show you one or two of their lessons in an accessible format. But once you dig deeper, you notice that a lot of that stuff isn't there. And I found that time and time again. So when I ask during these review cycles for a demonstration of their accessibility features, that pretty much ends the meeting. They'll say, we'll get back to you. We'll have someone reach out to you and give a demonstration, and they have to go find their accessibility person who can actually navigate through the system. But I do think that's time well spent. And then it also lets them know that this is something that's important to you, and you're not going to be looking at products that don't have those features. So we want to consider what are we asking students to do, and what do we really need them to do. So there might be settings changes within your learning management system that foster more accessibility. We want to make sure that if IT or the purchasing department gets these things up and running for us, that just working isn't enough. There's often some time that needs to be spent on the setup. So we should be looking at the setup of our tools, not just looking at the tool itself and if it's working. So administrators need to run through those settings and see if there's anything that can be turned on or turned off. Sometimes there are just too many features available, and we need to streamline what people are really using. I know that we do that with our learning management system. We cut off a good half of what's potentially available for people because we want to create a more consistent experience for our users. Again, so the format matters. You can have this great content, but if it's not in a great format like this slide here, where you have to read all the way across the screen and maybe some of your eyeballs aren't able to track across from line to line, and I know that's even more common with younger students, it's difficult for them unless they're kind of tracing along with their fingers. They lose track of which line they're on. So there's some features for that. We do a couple things in our district. We have some presets where teachers can just click on it and turn their pages into 2-column pages, and they can enter their text that way. And that reduces the width of the text blocks to something a little more optimal for reading, much like newspaper columns. So they've been ahead of the curve on this for a long time. But if you wanted to explore, for some of you advanced users, you can actually tweak that in the HTML yourself, and we make that available to people if they want to try that out. So there's an optimal line width that is often much narrower than people might identify. So this is that same slide as you saw a couple slides ago, but just with the width cut down, and you can see that it's much easier to read and faster to navigate through. Context is a big one for us because we often talk about this is one of those features that's good for all learners, right? So you never start a page in your learning management system, I hope, and then just embed a YouTube video without any additional context to it, because we wouldn't do that in our face-to-face courses, and students in online and distance learning environments need even more support in this area. So if we're putting in a video, we need to think about how we would have done that in the face-to-face setting. If I play a video for my learners, I'm going to be talking about it as I'm setting it up. So I'm kind of preparing them for what it is we're about to watch. I'm telling them about things we should be looking out for while we're watching the video. I'll likely even pause it as it's playing every few minutes just to do a quick check and make sure everybody's picking up on the important elements. And then I'm going to follow it up with some kind of activity for the students to do related to the information in the video. That doesn't happen if you just create a new page in your learning management system and embed a YouTube video and think that students are going to be engaged with it and watch it and then move on. We want to wrap everything we do in some kind of context. And now the way we're displaying our content, it will likely be text heavy. You can put some additional audio or video support in there, but you do want to make sure that if they're going to be accessing a video or downloading a file, that we're telling them what it is they're supposed to be doing with that. And I know that there's a big push to use primary sources in learning materials. One of the frustrations I've seen is that some of these primary sources are, the reading level itself is just completely inaccessible to the learners. So in a 7th grade course that I was reviewing, they were having a student link out to this page from the National Institute of Health. Great primary source. When I went there, there was a page on genetics that likely people who were in grad school classes could understand, but it wasn't necessarily something a 7th grade science student was going to be all that taken with. So there are things in there that just were completely, maybe a waste of time would be a friendly way of even saying it, but let's be realistic about what students are actually going to do and read. We talk a lot at 287 about desire paths. So we might create an experience for someone, but what's someone actually going to do with it? What's the realistic behavior that the learners are going to have with that material? So we want to kind of accept that people are going to do something in a particular way, and we can kind of help support and work around that. But reading some long study for geneticists isn't one of those things. Anything a student downloads, we should be making those file names descriptive, so that they know what they're getting into when they download it, and then it's easier for them to find again later. And we also want to make sure that if we're using something like a web quest, that we provide sufficient directions for how students are supposed to navigate through that. Some of the web quests I've seen have tabs for text, audio, video, images, additional information. I think that most learners would go to one of those pages and read the text that was there and think that they got everything that they were supposed to get out of it, not knowing that the audio elements and the video elements were completely different content than what was stated in the text, that it's supposed to be a whole experience for them to go through. So unless you're telling users how to do that and linking directly to the spaces they're supposed to be, they'll often have a different experience than their peers. So we want to make sure that the context we're wrapping those things with, the directions we give, provides for that consistency of experience. And then one of the things that I try to do with my 12th grade English students, at least, is to make sure that they're learning proper technique as well. So if they're submitting slideshows that are not accessible, or images without alt text, or the formatting is off, I make sure that those are all part of the feedback I give them and the expectations I have for them. So hopefully, if you're like me, this screen feels like somebody is screaming into your eyeballs. And it's frustrating that this color selection is actually a preset. This isn't something that I had to go out and choose the worst possible color combination I could. This is what I was given for an option. So color contrast itself becomes an accessibility issue. And I often have, I think almost daily, somebody sends me something and asks me if the contrast in that is okay. And what I hope that they realize is that I'm just running those same colors through the color checker that they could use as well. But the clarity of the contrast also helps support the acquisition of information. I know that probably not sending students out to all kinds of social media environments. Oh, I see the comment about a color checker. There are some color contrast checkers available online. I have a few that I prefer and make available in the resources, but if you simply search color contrast checker, you'll be able to enter in your colors that you're using, and it will tell you if it meets what's called the WCAG guidelines and standard and the web content accessibility guidelines. We want to be shooting for kind of the highest rate of compliance that we can, and color is an easy way to do that. We don't really want to be offering content to students that can't read, especially those colorblind users, where some of that text, if you're using like a green or a red on a darker background, kind of blend into each other. As far as social media is concerned, there's some accessibility features built in with that as well. If you have a Twitter account, it's good to start practicing some of these and demonstrating your commitment to accessibility. In your profile settings, you can check compose image descriptions, and that will allow you to, when you post a screenshot or an image, it will allow you to post a description of that. So in one way, you could use it to get around Twitter's character count. I've seen people post images of text and their descriptions of text to get around that character limit. But also, there's a lot of screenshots of text flying around online. And I know that there are a lot of blind users of Twitter who really rely on these kinds of features to be able to participate. This is an example from the Monterey Bay Aquarium where they were participating in a meme that was going around on Twitter. And so they wanted to throw out one of their own versions. But you see what they did at the end is that they actually then went up and followed up that thread of tweets with a description of what was happening in their meme, so that nobody was left out. And the Monterey Bay Aquarium really does a great job of making users feel included. On Facebook, there were some challenges, and they've been working on this recently. I don't again, I don't use this with students, but I use it for some of my own professional development and have started a couple of different groups for sharing resources. When you are uploading a photo, you can go back and edit that and put in a description. Facebook now also allows for dark mode and for even putting some of your content in bold. So in Facebook groups and pages now, if you're participating in a group, sharing resources, or for any other group, you can see that there are now little features that come up as you're typing that allow you to use different styles for your text. So if you're using headings or unordered or ordered lists or quotations, it actually allows you to designate those now, so that'll be another support for people who are participating with your content. So some of those features are starting to pop up and then get rolled out for wider use. So here's a few tips. Making sure that your menus are compact when your students are going into a learning management system. How can they navigate to content quickly? If they can skip entire sections, that is preferable, so that they don't have to tab through every single thing that's listed in the class. Making content available for offline use as well. We have things like apps, so we deliver paper to students if we need to, but there are ways of making content available that it isn't just something that they need a connection for. I mentioned the use of a style guide, using bold or italics for emphasis and not crazy fonts and colors. We use a closed caption service in our district. The one we use is rev.com, but there are a few others. And for just over $1 a minute video, they'll send you back a caption file within a day that you can then upload to YouTube, because creating those caption files yourselves, even when there's an auto captioning feature, can be problematic. It still takes a long time to go back and edit. So it's well worth the few bucks we send off to Rev to get those caption files back and use them that way. Making sure that we're using the presets available. They're not just for design, they serve a purpose. And screen readers really rely on proper presets in order to navigate through content and make sense of things for their users. We want those descriptive links to open in new tabs, so that if a user closes that tab, that they're not left out of where they were in their course. So if they close the tab that we link to, they're right back in the course where they left off, saving time. We're in a relentless pursuit of simplicity at 287 when we're designing our content, trying to take out as many clicks as possible and then make the content simply there. So we're not sending people out to YouTube, that those videos we're using are displayed right on the page or from Drive or from wherever. So start thinking about the needs that your learners have. All of the times you've encountered a 504 or an IEP, what are the most common accommodations that you've ever encountered, requests for your students that you've had to go back and make changes to? Hopefully some of those things are starting to appear on the screen now, and you've had experience likely with all of these, trying to support the learners. I know that in the early part of my career, this was frustrating for me, trying to go back and make these additional versions. And like I said, now it doesn't present any challenges, because this is just how I do things now. We want to make sure that, again, what we're doing impacts all of our learners. So even those students who are doing really well, or we're already getting A's, they've already kind of figured out the system and how we do things, all of these changes will actually be better for them as well and make things easier for them. So these things that are good for everyone, I think, are really important, because they're more inclusive, and then users get to use that cognitive load for other types of exploration and play or enrichment opportunities. So really just trying to make sure that what we're doing is clear. That's what really all of this comes down to, is clarity. I have a couple minutes left for questions. There's my contact information, jtfila, F-I-L-A, at district287.org. You can find me at Twitter, at John T. Fila. And then I share all of the resources here. I want to jump to, I took the Minnesota Manual of Accommodations and made it available to distance and online ed. So I took every one of their suggestions and converted it into something we might use in an online learning context. So if it was something for users that have blind, low vision, or partial sight, deaf and hard of hearing, manual dexterity, this list goes on, but I edited all of the suggestions to remove references to the face-to-face classroom. So feel free to run with any of those. We have some resources and suggestions for accommodations for students, for tools that they can use to make their content more accessible. We use something called the UserWay app that will help students with color contrast or any of these other features right there in our learning management system. So I will sit back and see what questions have come in.
Yeah, one just came in, John, about accessibility with printed packets. With less amount of devices in hands of students, how can they continue this work without a device?
Okay, without a device. So with printed packets, what you want to make sure of is that I see that people will still reference embedded videos or there are embedded links, but they're just on a printed page. We want to make sure that those links are actually typed out, preferably using a URL shortener so that someone could, if they wanted to, go access that on a phone or a device. We want to make sure that any images, if there was alt text on the image, maybe this is another one of those situational accessibility features I talk about, where you may have had descriptive text on that page, but when you print it out, that descriptive text didn't go anywhere. So make sure that the descriptive text for your images on your printed pages is also available. It's really just about making sure that the same experience and information can be had regardless of how you access the devices.
Another great question from way early on into the start of your presentation was about the captioning of your presentation and how you're using the audio caption tool on slides. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a deaf household, and while I still like to turn the slides on just as a feature and a demonstration, it isn't considered compliant with the needs of live closed captioning, but it's the best thing I could do right now. What we do is make these videos available then later on that have been captioned, and we can go in and update those. I'm giving a session later today in our district, and while I will have this turned on, we also have an interpreter available for those users who need it. So it's what I can do right now, but it isn't perfect yet. And there are some tools that are better than others. PowerPoint has a great one. I love Microsoft's immersive reader that's built in across all of their applications. It's in Edge, it's in OneNote has some really amazing features for their screen reading tools. But we use that with struggling readers, or I mean, all kinds of features. So whatever the tools are, I'm trying to test them out. I'm trying to demonstrate the same kind of expectations I would have of anyone I'm talking to about this.
Wonderful. Well, we're about out of time, and you've just had such wonderful information about this, John. This is, I mean, and speaking for as a classroom teacher, these are things that we all need to be considerate of when we're planning, and your knowledge is definitely appreciated. A couple of things to our fabulous community today. We do have a continued lounge discussion. I just posted that link in the chat. If you're able to get that link before the chat is done, you should be able to find it on our website, and Dave and jump in at the end and they can clarify Yeah, but please follow everyone on Twitter, connect with the Minnesota DL Summit website. CEUs are available on there, and just continue this discussion and this learning as this new type of education is evolving. We're glad that you're all here.
Thank you, everybody.
What a wonderful session, John and Jamie. Thanks for doing the great moderation. I also appreciate everyone's professionalism through that little blip that we had. You know, that's how we make it big. You know, when we have our first Zoom bummer, you know, we're a big deal. So have an incredible couple minutes in between this session and our next. One thing to note is the next session is listed as a webinar instead of a meeting. So when you enter, it looks different. You will not have options for webcams, and you will only have options to be able to type in responses and do Q&A. And then that room will also be locked until just before 11 o'clock. So enjoy a couple of minutes of freedom and come back. We're going to have an amazing webinar starting at 11. Thank you. Thank you. And John, Jamie, thank you one more time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an amazing session. And anytime someone can say, please don't use Prezi, I geek out just a little bit.
I tried not to use a tool name and then it slipped out.
Yeah, that's an okay one for us to say. It looks nice, but yeah, that's about it.
All right.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, everybody.